In 1844, the nature of the world economy had become decidedly intertwined. The civilized nations of the world trading with each other and relying on international markets to meet their needs. Such is a world without war. However, many criticized the degree to which nations had grown dependent on the globalized economy. For example, most of Europe relied upon Scandinavia for its fish and whale oil, while Scandinavia didn't bother to cultivate enough farmland to feed itself because it was able to import so much food from Visegrad. Even China fell into this trap, trading with Lakandu for a recently discovered commodity, oil. However, in such a globalized economy, there was bound to be a weak link, and in the mid-19th century, that link was the Burgos Federation. Having suffered continuous, uninterrupted decline since the signing of the Pax Melitensis, they had taken out loans from every country in Europe which would loan to them, especially Italy. This money was spent funding insurgents and guerrilla forces in Mali and Spain, which was as a result in a constant state of unrest, and was therefore ungovernable. The Mansa of Mali would simply send about 5,000 men into the area every month in order for them to kill whoever they liked, then cycle them out for another 5,000 men. Regardless, the engine that kept this anarchy going was Burgosi money, which they were running out of. Even their diamond mines in South Africa were unable to keep up with their constant expenses. As a result, in 1844, Italy called upon Vannonia to pressure the Burgos Federation for the repayment of debts. Vannonia honored this request and sent a modestly armed flotilla of ships to make a display of themselves in the Bay of Biscay. By 1845, the Burgos Federation refused to come to terms with their creditors, and simply printed tons of money to pay for everything they needed to pay for. This caused their currency to become worthless, leading to reactionary rebels overthrowing the crown government, installing a dictatorial regime. This dictatorship, under Generalissimo Jimenez Calderón, declared all debts null and void as the debtor government was ousted and their emperor gone. Italy then convened the nations of Europe to strike the Burgos Federation from the Treaty of Malta, which they did in short order. They were about to go to war, but the economic impact of what happened to the Burgos economy finally reached the rest of Europe. With the Burgos Federation defaulting on its debts, investors in the Italian economy pulled out their money en masse, leading to a wage crisis amongst the farmers, many of whom were direct employees of the government. As a result, France, which had foregone a great deal of agricultural work in favor of mass industrialism, supported by Italian food imports, plunged into famine as the price of bread skyrocketed. This led to the oil and coal industries of Visegrad grinding to a halt, no longer supplied by the complex machinery produced by French fabrication plants. Even China was impacted, the very first of their factories already going dark, and millions of people left unemployed as oil failed to come in from Visegrad and Lakandu. Global markets ground to a standstill, and millions panicked as a century's worth of capital essentially evaporated overnight. This would forever be known as Black Thursday, and the days that followed as the Dearth. So, while the Burgos Federation was ejected as a signatory from the Treaty of Malta, war did not break out due to the crisis, preserving the Pax Melitensis. There was nothing but hungry days ahead, and this manifested in the political realm as well. In 1852, 6 years into the dearth, the first anarcho-liberal party was formed in Alençon, signaling a new dawn for radical politics. They saw the meddling of overbearing governments as the cause of Black Thursday, and believed that if the market was left to its own devices, such major depressions could be avoided completely. In September, Italy, which was struggling to pay its soldiers, called Vannonia to help in its war to liberate the country of Tunisia from Mali. This was in an attempt to gain the eternal gratitude of a people who would owe them everything, and hopefully, the captive market of a country that would need to employ the labor of the unemployed Italian masses. Poland-Lithuania, not wanting to see another country emerge from the dearth before them, pledged to support Mali in such a war, if one were to occur. As such, war was avoided, but the Italians still clandestinely supported Tunisian rebels, who gained their independence from Mali in 1853. However, much to their chagrin, the Tunisians were totally uninterested in modernizing their country. In fact, that was part of why they left. because the bumbling Malian bureaucracy often used Tunisia as a guinea pig for their misguided investments, though these halted anyway as Mali's elite reeled from the dearth. The average Malian did not feel many changes, however, given that most of the country's wealth was centralized in the pockets of the powerful. So, such was the world during the dearth, as the cold, thin fingers of poverty wreathed a civilized world in ruin. As the dearth continued, Vannonia began to equalize with the other nations of the world, its status as a great power slipping in the face of complex globalization and a population reluctant to change. The new elections began in July, triggered by a majority of the Quail in response to the dearth. The Conservatives once again won the vote in the Quail, and the reactionary National Party joined with them in coalition in order to cling to relevancy. President Scott holding on to his second term for dear life, given he only had a few years left in office before the next presidential election. Later that year, Scandinavia decreed that its New World subjects would officially be subject to periods of extremely high taxation, with enslavement for those who would not pay. Certain regions were made into zones where people could only do certain kinds of work, and those who were not related to any living people in the mother country could not return unless invited. More and more taxes were heaped upon them, and more wealth was stolen away from them to stave off the dearth. And indeed, it seemed the Scandinavian Republic would be the first to emerge from those terrible days of hunger and strife off of the backs of their colonial frontiersmen. However, on September 14th, 1854, a coal miners' strike broke out along the Atlantic coast of North America, thousands of men emerging in their soot-stained clothes to argue for better treatment and better pay. When they were told no, they managed to rile up the Choctaw into raiding east, as the workers burned the mines and the earth belched black smoke. As such, the Scandinavian Republican Army, or SRA, rode upon them with their cavalry, slaughtering an estimated 1,300 people and injuring thousands more. This led to the wholesale secession of the Scandinavian colonies as the Kingdom of Washington, an absolute monarchy under the leadership of a former general, King Hakon Washington. A contravening of their precious democratic principles, most of the continent was theirs at once, save for certain regions bordering tribes the Republic had struck various deals with, like the Navajo, Blackfoot, Comanche, and Pawnee, while the Choctaw sided with the Kingdom of Washington. Scandinavia set their base of operations in this war of independence on the Isle of Hispaniola, and focused all their resources into beating Vannonia to Panama and northern Venezuela, desirous of a greater base from which to fight the Kingdom of Washington. On May 16, 1855, the Burgos Federation suffered yet another revolution, overthrowing Generalissimo Jimenez Calderón, the government being handed over to a band of Jacobins, joining Vannonia, Scandinavia, China, and the tiny state of Brandenburg as the fifth democracy in the world. The Malta signatories convened and decided that while the Kingdom of Washington was populated by Scandinavians, it wasn't a signatory, so the rights and privileges thereof were not extended to the new kingdom, and Scandinavia was not faulted for waging war upon them, keeping the Pax Melitensis intact. In fact, it was this war that made the Pax Melitensis seem less like a period of peace, and more like an international community of those dedicated to preserving that period of peace. Though, of course, this was a decidedly informal arrangement, at least for the moment. As a result, Europe looked on as the New World was engulfed in flames. The Kingdom of Washington was both poor and yet rich, bountiful in material wealth, yet without any money. As such, they generously utilized guerrilla tactics, seizing upon Scandinavian soldiers as they passed in their vulnerable battalions. However, the Scandinavians too tore ruthless indeed, whenever they caught one. The Scandinavians were particularly fond of drownings, or giving them over to their Indian allies to do as they pleased. But the signatories of the Treaty of Malta did nothing in this matter. They simply enjoyed their still waters, even as they grew ever more restless with each passing moment. Luxuriating in their poverty, it was becoming clearer and clearer that such a world was not a sustainable one.